This journey takes you to the land of the kings and begins in one of the oldest existing cities in India, Pushkar, Rajasthan. Since watching Bollywood movies at a very young age and seeing these extravagant and colorful wedding ceremonies, I knew that I had to, eventually, attend an Indian wedding myself. Luckily for me, my first Indian wedding experience happened in the country of India. Although I had an idea of what to expect, I could have never anticipated what actually happened. During my first day in Pushkar, my friend Yada and I were invited by another foreigner to come and listen to one of his rehearsals with a renowned Indian drummer named Natu. When I met Natu for the first time, I was welcomed into his home with a big hug and a gentle smile. As Natu taught the lesson, Yada and I sat by, swaying our bodies back and forth to the rhythm of the drums. We were getting really into it when all of a sudden the drumming stopped and Natu turned around and asked,
"Chris, you are a professional dancer?"
I wouldn't call myself a professional dancer, but I do enjoy dancing quite a bit.
"You are a very good dancer," Natu added. "You must come to wedding in the desert in a few days where I'll be drumming and my students will be drumming as well."
Yada and I turned to each other with delight and very quickly replied with, Of course we'll come! Yada and I were so excited to attend our first Rajasthani wedding. We couldn't wait to return to Natu's house in a few days to meet with the other foreigners that would be joining us. Together, we would all drive into the desert and attend this mysterious wedding. On the day of the wedding, Yada and I arrived at Natu's house an hour early. When we got there were 6 other foreigners also waiting and sipping on some chai, so we joined them until Natu finally came and told us we were about to depart. Yada and I, along with Natu and what became 7 other foreigners, a driver, 12 drums, all crammed into one jeep and headed an hour into the desert. Now, a bunch of people and objects cramming into one small vehicle is not out of the ordinary in India. I had experienced this already many times since I had already been in the country for about 3 months at this point. As soon as we stopped the vehicle, it was as if we landed on another planet. All of a sudden, our car was surrounded by the village people who had just stopped everything they were doing just to come and stare at us. I now know what a caged animal feels like in the zoo. Natu informed us that foreigners never go to this town, so for many of these locals, it was their first time seeing a Westerner. So as we continued to sip our chai, tons of locals continued to surround us and just stare at us with curiosity, as well as 50 cows. Even when we finished our chai and went back into the jeep, the villagers continued to surround the vehicle and stare at us through the window. As we drove off, I watched as the locals continued to stare in our direction until we became a speck of dust in the distance. We finally arrived in the village where the wedding would be taking place just after sunset, and were greeted by a family of 100 who had rarely ever seen a Westerner as well. The adults stared at us with curiosity as the children pointed and shyly giggled amongst themselves. It didn't take long for each of them to approach us and shake our hands and welcome us to their home. After 10 minutes of shaking hands, the chai had triggered an alarm in my bladder, and I asked Natu where I could find a toilet. Natu told me to follow one of the boys as he would show me where I could relieve myself. I followed the boy to the back of his house where he pointed to what looked like a very small shed. I walked over to the shed and surely enough, that's exactly what it was. Not only was it just a shed, it was packed with so much stuff that I couldn't even see the floor beneath me. I guess I had confusion written all over my face because all the villagers broke out in laughter. I decided to continue on this mission to find a toilet, or at least a solid ground I could see where I could relieve myself. It didn't take long for me to find an actual squat toilet, which was located about a 10-second walk around the shed. Until this very day, I'm still very confused as to why they wanted me to go in a shed. Oh well. When I arrived back to Natu and the rest of the group, I was informed that because this was a very traditional wedding, that all the females had to be very well clothed. Apparently, a kurta, trousers, sweater, and pashmina was not enough. Each of the ladies were given a very long, colorful skirt to put over our pants as a form of respect to the other people at the wedding. After our wardrobe adjustments, we were finally informed that it was time for our entrance to the wedding. We excitedly marched together along with the villagers into a white palace where the wedding would be held. We arrived to a room filled with many, many men. There wasn't one female at the ceremony besides myself and the other foreigners. Natu informed us that it is traditional to separate the men from the women at a wedding celebration. Apparently, we weren't going to witness the actual ceremony, but instead the post-ceremony celebrations. Natu told us that we needed to be silent and follow his every move. Unsure with what was going on, I obliged. We followed Natu into a line until we were standing in front of the king of the village. Wait, what? A king?
Yes, the king of the village is in the wedding and we must give our respects and impress him with our performance.
I could not believe I was meeting a king. I can now check that off my bucket list. Just like Natu, we put our hands together in Namaste and followed Natu to where the king sat. We took turns bowing our heads to the king. We then followed Natu to the stage where the drums were set up where he and his students would perform. Myself, Yada, and a couple of the other girls Natu invited sat quietly behind Natu and the drummers and took in the performance and our surroundings. While Natu and his students beat on the drums, it did not take long for a large crowd to come closer to the stage. Just as the drumming picked up, all of the girls I was sitting with decided they had to go to the washroom. I stayed back and continued to listen to the performance. It wasn't long into the performance when Natu turned around and told me that it was my turn to perform. With much confusion, I said to him, "What do you mean perform?" He replied with, "Go, perform, go dance." I looked around at the large crowd of men and said, "You've got to be kidding." Of course, conveniently, all of the other girls were still in the washroom, and it was only me who was asked to dance in front of 100 men and a king. Once again, I said, "You've got to be kidding." For a minute, I didn't budge from my seat until Natu looked back at me again with sweat dripping from his head and said, "Please, Chris, you must perform. They're expecting you to perform." When I was invited to the wedding by Natu, there was absolutely no talk about performing or dancing in front of a king. But Natu gave his word, and there was nothing else I could do but to get up there and shake what my mama gave me. Just as I was about to get up, the other girls returned from the washroom and had no idea that they were going to join me and make a fool out of themselves. I quickly shouted to them, "We're on!" With a lot of confusion and some hesitation, we all headed out to the dance floor. As I walked over, a very important thought occurred to me. How was I going to dance? I was surrounded by a very traditional family, the town king, and all I knew how to do was shake my ass and drop it like it's hot. So with the keyword tasteful in mind, I swayed my hips, just a little, back and forth to the beat of the drums. Then as time went on, I got into it, and that tasteful word left my head without saying goodbye. I started to really move my body to the music. I looked around at the other girls who were throwing their hands up in the air, closing their eyes, and jumping around like wild monkeys. I burst out laughing just as Natu and his students stopped drumming. The girls and I quickly ran back to our seats as one of the foreigners who was drumming, and also from Canada, turned around to us to let us know that our performance looked like a therapy group letting everything go. I had to agree with him. Our performance looked very, hippie-like. After that performance, we all headed over to the women's party, which was on the other side of the palace. As we walked past the crowd of men, they excitedly repeated, "You are very amazing dancer! More dance! More dance!" Although I'm fairly positive that they weren't really impressed with their dancing as they were with a bunch of white Western females shaking their goods. When we arrived at the women's party, the bride and all of her family were dressed up in these beautiful saris of every color of the rainbow. Each one of them were taking turns spinning around the room very gracefully, captivating each one of us foreigners. Natu and his students set up their drums again, and then Natu turned to us ladies and said that we'd be performing once again. Now, dancing for the men was one thing, but dancing for the ladies, who are very traditional, are covered from head to toe, including veils over their face, presents a new challenge. But once again, myself and the other foreign ladies went up to perform. Again, the drumming took us away, and we ended up being a little bit more provocative than we maybe should have been. However, the ladies loved it. They applauded for us as we finished our dance and took our seats. After the dancing came to a definite end, we were given food and whiskey. Not a bad pay, I must say. As we ate, Natu came over to inform us that everyone really loved our performance, so much that we had been invited back the next day for some more celebrations. As much fun as I had, I decided to retire my job as an Indian wedding performer. We finished our food and whiskey and then headed over to thank the families for inviting us to this special occasion. The wedding festivities finally came to an end, and we all piled back into that Jeep. Myself, the 7 other foreigners, Natu, the driver, and the 12 drums, and we headed out on our journey back home. As we drove away, each one of us looked at each other and burst out laughing. I thought to myself that I definitely couldn't have planned this part of my trip beforehand. I looked out the window, into the sky, smiled, and said, "India, you never fail to surprise me." And that is another one of my crazy travel stories. If you haven't seen the first video that I've done similar to this one, you can check it out here. Peeing on a public bus in India? Intriguing, right? Have any of you guys been to an Indian wedding? I'd love to hear about your experience. Share your story in the comment box below. And don't forget to press that little subscribe button. It's free, and then you'll be notified every time I put up a new video. And I would greatly appreciate that if you did enjoy the story to share it with your friends. Happy travels!
எனக்கென